It began as a simple dirt path winding through the coastal plains of southeast Texas, just wide enough for a horse-drawn wagon to pass. The road was not much to look at, just two parallel ruts pressed into the black prairie soil by the wheels of farmers and freight haulers. It connected the sleepy river town of Beaumont to a scattering of rice farms and cattle pastures that stretched toward the low, pine-covered hills. The grass along its edges grew tall and tough, and in the wet months the path turned to a thick, sticky gumbo that could swallow a wagon wheel up to the axle. Anyone who traveled it knew to carry a shovel and a length of chain. But for decades, the road carried little more than a few dozen travelers each week, and that was more than enough for the people who lived along it. Beaumont itself was a quiet place, a town of about 9,000 people who made their living from lumber, rice, and the slow-moving Neches River. The streets were unpaved, the buildings mostly wood frame, and the biggest excitement was the arrival of a steamboat or the weekly train from Houston. People said the only thing that ever disturbed the peace was a drunk sailor or a distant thunderstorm. Then came the morning of January 10th, 1901. On that day, a strange sound rolled across the coastal plain. It was a low, deep roar like a bull in pain or a train derailing, but it seemed to come from the ground itself. The people of Beaumont felt it in the soles of their feet. Those who were working in the fields looked up to see a column of mud, gas, and oil shooting high into the sky, far higher than the tallest pine. The spindle-top gusher had blown. A well drilled by the tycoon Patio Higgins and the engineer Anthony Lucas had struck a reservoir of oil so vast that it burst with such force that the derrick was blown apart. Mud and crude rained down for miles. News spread faster than the wind. Telegraph wires burned with word of the discovery. Within days, the rush began, and the road that had been nothing more than a dusty track became the most important piece of land in Texas. The first wave of arrivals came by train, but the trains could only take them as far as Beaumont. From there, it was a 10-mile journey to the Spindletop Hill, and the only way to get there was by that narrow, rutted road. Within a week, the road was choked with men on foot, men on horseback, wagons loaded with timbers and tools, buggies carrying investors in city suits, and even a few automobiles that got stuck in the mud before they had gone a quarter-mile. The teamsters who normally hauled rice to the mill saw the opportunity of a lifetime. They raised their rates and kept raising them. A wagon load of lumber that once cost $5 to haul now cost $50, then $100, but the speculators paid it. They would have paid anything to get a stake on that hill. The road itself began to change under the pressure. The constant traffic churned the soft black soil into a deep, bottomless mire. A wagon would start out at dawn, lurch forward, and stall axle deep before the sun was fully up. Men cursed and unloaded their cargo, carried it by hand to drier ground, and then dug out the wagon. Others drove their teams so hard that horses dropped dead in the traces, and their bodies were simply dragged to the side and left. The stench of sweat, oil, and rotting animal filled the air. The road was no longer a path. It became a battlefield. The first solution was to lay planks across the mud. Lumber companies saw the demand and began sending entire trainloads of oak and pine boards to Beaumont. Workers drove them into the ground side by side, creating a rough wooden surface that floated on the swampy earth. Men called it the corduroy road because the planks laid crosswise resembled the ridges of corduroy fabric. It was bumpy and slippery when wet, but it kept the wagons moving. Soon the entire road from Beaumont to Spindletop was a plank road, 3 miles long at first, then extended to 10 miles as new wells were drilled farther out. Traveling on it was a bone-rattling experience, but it was better than the mud. Along this plank road, a city sprang up overnight. Tents and shacks lined its edges, selling whiskey, food, tools, and dreams. There were hotels made of canvas, banks that operated out of wooden crates, and land offices where claims were bought and sold faster than the ink could dry. The road was never quiet. 24 hours a day, it rang with the clatter of hooves, the grind of wagon wheels, the shouts of teamsters, and the constant hiss and roar of the wells themselves. At night, the sky above the road glowed orange from the flares burning off natural gas. It looked like the entrance to a forge. One man who traveled that road in those early days was a young driller named Tom. He had come from Pennsylvania, where the oil boom had started decades earlier, but he had never seen anything like Spindletop. He arrived at the Beaumont train station with a canvas bag and a wad of cash, and he hired a wagon to take him out to the hill. The wagon driver was a local farmer who had traded his plow for a team of mules. He charged Tom $200 for the ride, and Tom thought it was a robbery, but he paid. The wagon lurched onto the plank road, and Tom held onto the side as the boards banged and clattered beneath him. All around, he saw men digging with shovels, laying more planks, repairing broken sections. He saw a Model T Ford stuck sideways across the road, its driver arguing with a teamster who wanted to drive around him. He saw a mule that had broken its leg and was being shot by its owner, the body pushed into the ditch. The road was a living, breathing thing, hungry and relentless. When Tom reached the hill, he saw a forest of wooden derricks, so close together that the men on one platform could shake hands with the men on the next. Oil was everywhere. It pooled in the dirt. It sprayed from leaky pipes. It coated the men, the tools, the horses, and the road itself. The smell was strong enough to make a man dizzy, but Tom did not mind. He found work within an hour, and he stayed on that hill for 2 years, drilling wells and earning more money in a month than he had made in a year back home. He never forgot the road that brought him there. The plank road did not last forever. The timber soaked up crude oil and became a fire hazard. Several times, a spark from a wagon wheel or a dropped lantern set the boards ablaze, and the flames spread fast. The fires burned so hot that they melted the metal tires of wagons. After one particularly bad fire in the summer of 1902, the county commissioners decided to take action. They authorized the construction of a new road, a gravel road, wide enough for 2 wagons to pass. They used convict labor and hired men from the boomtown to break limestone and spread it in layers. The gravel road was harder and drier, and it cut the travel time from Beaumont to the field to just an hour. But the gravel road also brought more traffic. By 1903, Spindletop was producing over 100,000 barrels of oil a day. The field had more than 400 wells. The road carried not just men and equipment, but also the oil itself, in wooden barrels loaded onto wagons, and later in iron tanks pulled by steam tractors. The tractors were a new invention, loud and heavy, and they tore up the gravel. The road had to be repaired constantly. Crews worked day and night, shoveling fresh stone into the ruts, tamping it down with heavy rollers. The road became a permanent construction project, never finished, always needed. The road also became a symbol. For the people who lived along it, the road was the source of both opportunity and trouble. Farmers who had owned land that the road crossed suddenly found themselves rich because speculators needed access to their property. One farmer named Zeke had a small rice field that the road cut through diagonally. He was an old man who had never owned more than 100 acres, and he lived in a one-room cabin with his wife. When the oil boom came, surveyors knocked on his door and offered him a lease. He signed it without reading the fine print. 6 months later, he was receiving royalties from a well that had been drilled on his land. He used the money to pave a half-mile of the road in front of his house, the first concrete pavement in the county. He said he did it so the automobiles would stop splashing mud on his wife's laundry. But for every Zeke, there were a dozen families who lost their homes. The road expanded in such a hurry that property lines were forgotten. 2 speculators would build corduroy roads that met at odd angles, creating confusion and lawsuits. Men built fences across the road, demanding tolls. Others dug ditches to divert water, flooding sections. The county sheriff had to be stationed on the road full-time, settling disputes with a pistol on his hip. The sheriff's name was Bill, and he later wrote a memoir about those years. He said the road was like a country that had no government, only muscle and money. As the boom spread, the road extended. It pushed north into the new fields at Batson and Sour Lake, then farther into the East Texas oil fields that would gush in the 1930s. The road that had started as a humble track to Spindletop became the spine of the entire Texas oil industry. It carried drilling rigs that weighed tons, hauled pipelines that stretched for miles, and moved hundreds of thousands of barrels of crude to refineries along the coast. The road was no longer just a road. It was the artery that pumped life into the economy of the American South. And still, the road kept changing. In 1920, the state of Texas took over the route and paved it with asphalt. It became part of the state highway system, designated as State Highway 87. Then in the 1950s, it was widened again to 4 lanes, then 6. The old plank road was buried beneath layers of concrete and tar. The farmers' fields were replaced by subdivisions and shopping centers. The wooden derricks were torn down, replaced by steel pump jacks that nodded day and night. The road that had been built for horses and wagons now carried semi-trucks loaded with pipe and chemicals, 18-wheelers that never stopped. But if you look closely, you can still see the old road. In a few places where the pavement has cracked or a new highway has been built alongside, you can find the remnants of a forgotten lane, narrow and straight, overgrown with weeds. You can find a rusty plank from the corduroy days, half buried in the dirt. You can find a marker, a small bronze plaque that tells the history, but most people drive past without noticing. They do not know that the asphalt beneath their tires was laid on top of 100 years of sweat, mud, oil, and sacrifice. The road that built the oil boom was not a single road, of course. It was thousands of miles of road, connecting every field to every refinery, every boomtown to every market. But the original stretch, the one that led from Beaumont to Spindletop, was the first. It was the road that taught a generation of Americans that oil was not just a resource to be drilled out of the ground. It was a thing that had to be moved, transported, and delivered, and the road was the only way to do it. Now, imagine yourself standing at the edge of that road at dawn in the year 1902. The sky is gray with smoke and steam. The ground trembles from the pounding of machinery. Men are shouting, mules are braying, and a steady stream of wagons and carts rolls past you, all heading for the hill. The air smells of crude oil and wet wood. You can feel the heat from a nearby fire that is still smoldering from the night before. You are standing on a road that did not exist 2 years ago, and you know that it will not exist the same way 2 years from now. But in this moment, it is everything. It is the lifeline of a new world. This road was the first to be pushed through the swamp, but it would not be the last. The oil boom did not stop at Spindletop. It rolled across Texas like a wave, and behind it came the road builders. They followed the drill bits, laying down gravel and asphalt in a hurry, always in a hurry, because every day that the road was not finished meant money lost. They built roads so fast that surveyors had to run to keep up. They built roads that curved around the biggest trees and crossed creeks on temporary bridges that washed away in the first rain. They built roads that were more like scars on the landscape, raw and red and bleeding. But those roads worked. And as the roads spread, they connected the isolated oil fields to the rest of the world. A driller in the Permian Basin of West Texas could send his crude to a refinery in Houston, 200 miles away, and the road made it possible. A wildcatter in Oklahoma could hire a crew from Louisiana, and the road brought them. A mechanic in Dallas could ship a replacement part to a rig in the Panhandle, and the road delivered it. The oil boom created a nation that moved by road, and the roads created the oil boom. There is a story about a man named Charlie who drove a truck on those early roads. He started in 1915, hauling barrels from Spindletop to Port Arthur. The roads were still unpaved, and he had to stop every 10 miles to patch a tire or refill his radiator. He drove a chain-drive Mack truck that could carry 12 barrels at a time, and he drove it 16 hours a day. He told his grandson years later that the road was his office, his home, and his enemy. He fought the road every day, and the road fought back. It shook his teeth loose. It tore up his tires. It made him cuss and pray and sometimes cry. But he never quit because the road paid better than anything else. Charlie was part of a new profession, the long-haul trucker. Before the oil boom, freight moved mostly by train, but the trains could not go everywhere and they could not go fast enough. The road offered freedom. A truck could go wherever there was a track, and the oil boom created a million places that needed tracks. In the early years, the road was also a place of violence. There were fights over who had the right to travel it first. There were armed guards protecting oil shipments. There were bandits who ambushed wagons and stole the crude, selling it to wildcat refineries that asked no questions. The road was lawless, and the men who traveled it were hard. They carried guns and knives and probably would have carried cannons if they could have fit them on their trucks. One driver named Slim was known for his custom-made revolver, a 4.5 with a 7-inch barrel that he called the Road Dog. He claimed he had used it more times than he could count, but the road was also a place of community. At the end of a long day, drivers would pull over at a way station, a wooden shack that sold gasoline, coffee, and fried chicken. They would sit on crates and talk about the conditions of the road, which stretches were washed out, where the mud was worst, who had gotten stuck and needed help. They shared advice and warnings and gossip. They formed a brotherhood of the road that crossed company lines and state lines. They called themselves the Grease Monkeys and the Gear Jammers. They were proud of their work. One of the most famous way stations was at a crossroads called Hampshire, about halfway between Beaumont and Port Arthur. It was run by a woman named Maud, who had come down from Ohio with her husband. He was a driller who got killed in a blowout, and Maud stayed on, running the station for 30 years. She fed thousands of men. She knew every driver by name. She kept a ledger of who owed her money and always got paid. She said the road was like a river, always flowing, always changing. She said men were like driftwood carried on it. By the time the 1920s rolled around, the road that had started as a 10-mile plank track had become hundreds of miles of paved highway. The state of Texas built a network of roads to serve the oil fields, and other states followed. California built roads to its own oil fields in the San Joaquin Valley. Oklahoma built roads to the Glen Pool and the Cushing Field. Louisiana built roads to the Tuscaloosa Trend. Everywhere oil was found, a road was built to carry it out, and the road itself became an engine of progress. The money spent on building it created jobs, not just for teamsters and truckers, but for engineers, surveyors, laborers, and mechanics. The materials needed for road construction, gravel, sand, asphalt, concrete, became booming industries themselves. The road encouraged the invention of better automobiles and more reliable trucks. It pushed forward the development of traffic lights, road signs, and safety regulations. The road built the oil boom, yes, but the oil boom built the modern road system in return. So, as you sit here listening to this story, think of the road beneath the asphalt. Think of the men who died in the mud, the women who cooked in the way stations, the mules that broke their legs, the drivers who never slept. Think of the millions of barrels of oil that flowed along that road, turning into gasoline and kerosene and diesel, fueling the 20th century. Think of the road as a character in the greatest economic story America has ever known, and know that it is still there, still carrying the oil, still changing, still alive. The road that built the oil boom is not a relic of the past. It is a living road, and it is still being built today. The road kept growing, and with each mile it grew smarter. By the late 1920s, the men who built roads had learned from the mistakes of the first muddy tracks. They started using something called a subgrade, a layer of packed earth and gravel that gave the road a solid foundation. They learned to crown the road slightly in the middle so that rainwater would run off to the sides instead of pooling into axle-deep potholes. They invented the motor grader, a machine that could scrape and level a road faster than 100 men with shovels. And they discovered that oil itself, the very substance the roads were built to carry, could be used to bind the gravel into a hard, durable surface. They sprayed crude oil onto the dirt roads and rolled them flat, creating what they called oil-treated roads. It was crude and it was messy, but it worked. The road that carried the oil began to be made of oil, but the oil-treated roads had a problem. In the summer, they became sticky and soft, and the truck tires would leave deep ruts. In the winter, the oil hardened and cracked, so the engineers turned to asphalt, a byproduct of refining crude oil. Asphalt had been used for centuries in Mesopotamia, but nobody had thought to use it on a large scale for American roads. The first asphalt pavement in Texas was laid in 1914 on a stretch of road connecting Dallas to Fort Worth. It was only 5 miles long, but it was a revelation. The surface was smooth, it didn't turn to mud, and it lasted for years. Soon, every oil boomtown wanted asphalt. The problem was that asphalt required refineries, and refineries required oil, so the cities that had the oil also had the asphalt. The towns that didn't have oil had to wait, and their roads stayed dirt. That inequality, that hierarchy of pavement, became a silent engine of the boom. The best roads led to the richest fields, and the richest fields attracted the most workers, and the workers built the towns, and the towns demanded more roads. It was a cycle that fed itself, and it never stopped. In the 1930s, the road that built the oil boom faced its greatest test. The Great Depression hit Texas hard. Oil prices fell to 10 cents a barrel. Thousands of wells were capped. The boomtowns emptied out. The road that had been so busy now lay quiet. Weeds grew through the cracks in the asphalt. The way stations closed, their windows boarded up. Maud's station in Hampshire finally shut its doors in 1932, and she moved back to Ohio. The brotherhood of the road scattered. Some drivers went to work on the railroads, some went to the Civilian Conservation Corps, and some just disappeared. But the road did not die. It waited. And when the world went to war again in 1941, the road woke up. The Allies needed oil, and they needed it fast. The oil fields of Texas and Oklahoma and California became strategic assets. The government poured money into expanding the pipelines and building new roads to connect them. The road that had once carried wagons now carried tanker trucks loaded with aviation fuel. It carried soldiers and supplies. It carried the weight of the war effort on its asphalt shoulders. The drivers who had survived the Depression came back. They were older now, their hands scarred from years of wrenching and patching tires. They drove 24 hours a day when they had to, sleeping in their cabs while their trucks rolled on. They knew the road like a blind man knows his home. They could feel a soft spot in the pavement before they saw it. They could hear a bearing failing a mile before it locked up. They were the unsung heroes of the war, and the road was their battlefield. After the war, the road exploded. The United States had built a vast network of highways during the war, but they were military roads, narrow and rough. The soldiers who came home wanted to drive their new cars on smooth, fast roads. The automobile industry, which had spent the war building tanks and jeeps, now turned back to making cars. And the oil industry, which had pumped billions of barrels for the war, now pumped for peacetime. In 1956, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, the largest public works project in human history. It called for 41,000 miles of interstate highways, a system of roads that would cross the country from coast to coast, connecting every city and every town. And at the heart of that system was the road that had started at Spindletop. The original 10-mile plank track was now part of a national network. It had been widened and straightened and repaved. It had become a small piece of Interstate 10, the highway that runs from California to Florida. But even as the road grew bigger and smoother, it lost something. The old road was a place of face-to-face encounters, of shared meals and shared stories. The new highways were anonymous. The way stations became truck stops, and the truck stops became franchises. The Brotherhood of the Road turned into a union of isolated men who talked to each other over CB radios. They still shared information, but it was digital, not personal. They still helped each other, but they did it with a wave and a nod instead of a handshake and a cup of coffee. The road had become efficient, but it had also become cold. In the 1970s, the road faced another crisis. The oil embargo of 1973 sent gas prices soaring. Lines formed at the pumps. The road that had been built to carry oil now found itself starved of the fuel it needed to function. Truckers went on strike, blockading the highways in protest. The road became a political stage. Drivers wore orange vests and carried signs that said "No gas, no work." They parked their rigs across the interstates at rush hour, bringing traffic to a standstill. The government negotiated and the crisis passed, but the lesson lingered. The road was not just a conduit for oil. It was a lifeline for the whole economy, and when the lifeline was threatened, the country felt it in its bones. Meanwhile, the original oil fields were aging. Spindletop had long since stopped gushing. The wells that remained were pumped slowly, their yields measured in barrels per day instead of thousands. The road that had been built to serve those fields now carried tourists and commuters. The old boomtowns became ghost towns, their wooden shacks rotted away under the Texas sun, but the road endured. It had been repurposed. It carried timber from the pine forests of East Texas. It carried cattle from the ranches of the hill country. It carried produce from the Rio Grande Valley. It became a road for everything, because the road that built the oil boom had also built the infrastructure for everything else. In the 1980s, the oil industry went through another boom and bust. The price of oil collapsed in 1986, and the fields that had been revived with new technology like horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing suddenly became unprofitable. The road felt it again. The truck traffic dropped. The gas stations closed. The towns along the road shrank. But this time the road did not die. The road had become too important to die. The road was no longer just an oil road. It was an American road. Today, if you drive down that original stretch from Beaumont to Spindletop, you will see a different landscape. The swamp is mostly gone, drained and developed. There are convenience stores and strip malls and housing developments. The old Spindletop Hill is a state historic site, a grassy park with a replica derrick. The bronze plaque is still there, but it is small and easy to miss. The road itself is a 4-lane highway named Spur 93, and it is busy with traffic. Most of the drivers are going to work or to the grocery store. They do not know that they are driving on ground that once shook with the force of a gusher. They do not know that the asphalt beneath their tires was paid for by the sweat of 1 million men and women who came to this place 100 years ago. But the story of the road does not end there. In the last 20 years, a new oil boom has risen, fueled by the technology of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. The boom has spread across the country, from the Bakken Shale in North Dakota to the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania to the Permian Basin in West Texas. And once again, the road is at the center of it. In the Bakken, the roads are being torn apart by the weight of water trucks and sand trucks and oil trucks. In the Permian, the roads are being expanded and rebuilt to handle the traffic. The same problems that existed in 1901 are happening again: mud, dust, broken axles, traffic jams, and accidents. The road is still the lifeline. It is still the cheapest way to move the oil from the well to the pipeline. It is still the only way that works when the pipeline has not been built yet, and the drivers are still there. They are a different breed now. They drive 18-wheelers with satellite tracking and automated transmissions. They sleep in climate-controlled cabs that cost $200,000. They talk on their phones and listen to podcasts, but they still know the road. They still feel the vibration through the steering wheel. They still pull over to help a stranded driver. They still cuss and pray and cry when the road fights back. Charlie's grandson, if he ever existed, would recognize them. The road has changed, but the men and women who drive it have not. There is a story from the modern boom that echoes the old days. In 2014, a truck driver named Jimmy was hauling crude from the Permian Basin to a refinery in Corpus Christi. He drove a shiny new Peterbilt, but the road he traveled was as rough as the roads Charlie had driven a century before. The pavement was broken from the weight of the trucks. The shoulders were soft. The turns were sharp. Jimmy had been driving for 12 hours when he hit a patch of gravel that had spilled from a dump truck. His rig slid sideways, and he wrestled with the wheel, and the trailer started to jackknife. He thought he was going to roll. But he held on, and the tires found grip on the hard asphalt, and he pulled the rig straight. He pulled over at the next exit, climbed down from the cab, and stood on the shoulder, shaking. He looked at the road, and he said, "You almost got me, old girl." He had no idea that he was speaking to a road that had almost gotten Charlie too. The road that built the oil boom is still being built today. It is being built in the Eagle Ford Shale of South Texas, where the quiet ranches have been overtaken by drilling rigs and man camps. It is being built in the Marcellus Shale of West Virginia, where the narrow mountain roads are being widened to carry the heavy loads. It is being built in the Denver-Julesburg Basin of Colorado, where the suburbs are colliding with the oil fields. Everywhere the new booms happen, the road is there first, and it stays last. But the road is also changing the world in ways that the early builders could not have imagined. The road has led to climate change because the oil it carries is burned and becomes carbon dioxide. The road has led to traffic jams and smog and sprawl. The road has created a dependence on oil that has driven wars and shaped geopolitics. The road that built the oil boom also built the problems of the 21st century. And now, as the world tries to move away from fossil fuels, the road faces its greatest challenge. What happens to the road when the oil is no longer needed? Will it crumble and become a ghost road, like the ghost towns of the first boom? Or will it find a new purpose, carrying electricity from solar farms and wind turbines? Will the asphalt be dug up and recycled, or will it remain as a monument to a century of oil? Nobody knows yet, but the road is patient. The road has been through booms and busts before. The road has seen the mules replaced by trucks, the dirt replaced by asphalt, the wagons replaced by 18-wheelers. The road has adapted, and it will adapt again, because the road is not just a strip of pavement. The road is an idea. The road is the belief that you can get from one place to another, that you can move things and move yourself, that you can overcome distance and time. That idea is older than oil, and it will outlast oil. So the next time you drive across a highway, or down a country lane, or through a city street, think about the road. Think about the oil that made it and the oil that it carried. Think about the hands that laid every stone and every patch of asphalt. Think about the drivers who never slept, the way stations that fed them, the mules that died in the mud, the men who fought and cursed and loved this road. Think about the road as a living thing, a creature of mud and gravel and tar and steel. And remember that the road that built the oil boom is still alive, still moving, still carrying the weight of a world that runs on oil. And it will keep carrying long after the last well is capped and the last refinery shuts down, because the road is not just a road, it is the story of us. And yet there is another side to that story, one that does not often make it into the history books or the museum exhibits. It is the story of the people who were not part of the boom, who were pushed aside by it, or who simply watched it happen from the edges. The road that built the oil boom was not a road for everyone. It was built by men who were willing to work for pennies, many of them immigrants from Mexico and Eastern Europe, many of them black men from the deep South who had fled one kind of oppression only to find another in the oil fields. They laid the gravel and poured the concrete and drove the wagons, and when the boom went bust, they were the first to be let go, the first to be forgotten. I think about a man named Estevan, who came from a small village in northern Mexico in 1905. He crossed the Rio Grande on a raft, walked 200 miles to the oil fields, and found work building roads. He did not speak English. He did not know how to read or write, but he knew how to swing a pickaxe and how to drive a mule team. He slept in a tent with 40 other men, ate beans and tortillas, and sent half his pay back to his wife in Mexico. For 5 years, he worked on the roads around Spindletop and Batson and Sour Lake. He watched the gushers blow and the derricks rise, but he never owned a share of any well. He never made the kind of money that the wildcatters made. He just built the road. And when the boom ended in 1908, he was laid off. He walked back to the border, crossed the river again, and went home. He never returned to Texas. But his grandchildren would tell stories about him, stories about a man who built the road that built the oil boom, even though he himself never drove on it. Estevan's story is not unique. It is the story of thousands of men who built the infrastructure of the oil age and then disappeared from the record. The road that built the oil boom was built on their backs, and their names are not on any plaque. But the road remembers them. The road remembers the weight of their boots, the strain of their muscles, the sweat that dripped into the mud and became part of the gravel. The road does not forget, but the road also remembers the ones who came after, the ones who tried to stop the road or change its direction. There were farmers who fought the road, who did not want their land torn up for a highway they would never use. There were towns that refused to let the road pass through, preferring to remain isolated and quiet. There were environmentalists who protested the road's expansion, warning that it would destroy the wetlands and the wildlife. In the 1970s, a group of activists in East Texas tried to block the construction of a new section of highway that would cut through a forest of old-growth pines. They chained themselves to the trees. They wrote letters to the governor. They held press conferences. But the road won. The road always wins in the end. The trees were cut down, the activists were arrested, and the pavement was laid. Today, that section of road carries 10,000 vehicles a day, and nobody remembers the protest. The road has absorbed their resistance and moved on. There is a phrase that truck drivers use: the road will take you where you need to go, but it will not tell you why. That is the mystery of the road. It is a thing of purpose, but it has no purpose of its own. It is a tool, but it has no will. And yet, it seems to have a kind of destiny. It seems to pull people toward it, to draw them into its web of movement and commerce and possibility. I think about the young men and women who leave their small towns every year, who pack their bags and get on a bus or a train or a plane, but who always end up on a road. The road is the first and last thing they see. It is the threshold. It is the border between the known and the unknown. In the 1950s, the road that built the oil boom became part of something even larger, the interstate highway system. President Dwight Eisenhower had seen the Autobahns in Germany and recognized the need for a national network of highways, not just for civilian travel, but for military and economic purposes. The interstate system was the most ambitious road-building project in human history. It took 40 years and cost $500 billion. It reshaped the American landscape, carving through cities and suburbs and farms and forests. And in Texas, much of the interstate system followed the old oil roads. Interstate 10, which runs from Los Angeles to Jacksonville, follows the path of the original oil road from Beaumont westward. Interstate 20, which runs through Dallas and Fort Worth, follows the route of the early oil roads of West Texas. The old oil roads became the new interstates. The pavement got wider and smoother, the speeds got faster, but the route was the same. The road that built the oil boom became the road that built the American century, but the interstate system also brought new problems. It divided communities, it destroyed neighborhoods, it made the automobile the center of American life, and it made dependence on oil a permanent condition. The road that built the oil boom also built the traffic jams and the smog and the sprawl that define modern America. In Houston, which grew from a swampy trading post into the fourth largest city in the country largely because of the oil industry, the road became a monster. The highways are choked with traffic. The air is thick with exhaust. The city is a web of concrete and asphalt, a monument to the automobile. And at the center of it all is the old road, the original road from Spindletop to the refineries, now buried under layers of pavement and noise, but still there, still carrying the oil. I remember a story from a man named Ray, who drove a tanker truck for 30 years in Houston. He was born in 1947, the son of a roughneck who had worked the fields around Humble. Ray started driving when he was 22, right out of the Army. He drove the same route for decades, from the refineries in Texas City to the pipeline terminals in Houston. He knew every bump and crack in the road. He knew which exits had the best coffee and which way stations were staffed by the friendliest officers. He knew the road like a man knows his own face. And he watched the road change. He watched the 2-lane blacktop become a 6-lane freeway. He watched the farms become subdivisions. He watched the old motels and diners be replaced by chain restaurants and big box stores. He drove through every boom and every bust, and he never stopped. When he retired in 2002, he drove one last trip from Texas City to Houston, and he pulled over at the top of an overpass. He looked down at the road and he said, "I know every square inch of you. You are my life." Then he drove home and never drove a truck again. Ray's story is not special. It is the story of a million truck drivers who have spent their lives on the road, who have seen the road as both a workplace and a home. They are the ones who keep the road alive, who keep it moving, who keep it from becoming a monument. Without them, the road is just a strip of pavement. With them, it is a living thing, a creature of steel and rubber and diesel and dreams, and the dreams are still there. In the modern oil fields of the Permian Basin, young men and women are still chasing the same dream that Charlie and the boys chased a century ago. They are still trying to strike it rich, still trying to buy a big house and a faster truck and a better life. They work 12-hour shifts in the heat and the dust and the noise. They live in man camps and sleep in trailers. They spend their days operating drilling rigs and fracking pumps and water trucks. And they drive on the same roads that the first oil men drove on, roads that are now battered and broken from the weight of 1,000 trucks a day. I think about a woman named Carla, who drives a water truck in the Permian. She is 32 years old, a single mother of two. She started driving 3 years ago when the last boom was at its peak. She drives a truck that holds 18,000 gallons of water, and she hauls it from the water wells to the fracking sites. She drives 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. She makes $60,000 a year, which is more than she ever made working in a diner or a retail store. She pays her bills, she supports her kids, and she drives the road, but the road is brutal. The shoulders are soft, the pavement is cracked, the turns are too tight. She has seen accidents, dozens of them. She has seen trucks overturned, trucks on fire, trucks that have fallen into the mud. She has seen drivers die. She has almost died herself more than once. She hit a patch of ice on a bridge and spun out, and her truck came to rest against the guardrail, the water sloshing in the tank behind her. She sat there, shaking, for 10 minutes. Then she put the truck in gear and kept driving. Because the road does not stop for fear. The road does not care about your feelings. The road only wants you to move. What kind of life is that, to spend your days on a road that is trying to kill you? Carla will tell you it is a good life because it is a life with purpose. She is moving water, which is the most important thing in the oil field. Without water, there is no fracking. Without fracking, there is no oil. Without oil, there is no modern world. She is part of something huge, something that powers everything, and she is proud of that. Even when the road fights her, even when the truck breaks down, even when she is so tired she can barely keep her eyes open, she is proud. She looks at the road and she thinks, I am a part of you. But the road also breaks people. I think about the drivers who have lost their health, their marriages, their sanity. The road is a lonely place. It is a place where you are alone with your thoughts for hours, days, weeks. It is a place where you see the same scenery over and over, where the road becomes a kind of hallucination. Some drivers cannot handle it. They fall asleep at the wheel. They crash. They die. Others survive, but they are never the same. They become the road in a way. They develop a kind of intimacy with it that is hard to describe. They know the road better than they know their own families. They talk to the road. They curse the road. They love the road. And the road loves them back in its way. The road gives them a living. It gives them a purpose. It gives them a place in the world. There is a town in West Texas called Odessa. It sits on the edge of the Permian Basin, and it is a town that has been shaped by oil and by the road. In the 1950s, Odessa was a boomtown, full of roughnecks and wildcatters and dreamers. The main street was called Highway 80, and it carried truckloads of oil and cattle and cotton. The motels were full. The bars were full. The casinos were full. It was a town of noise and money and ambition. Then the boom ended and Odessa shrank. The highway was rerouted, bypassing the downtown. The motels closed. The bars emptied. The town became a shadow of itself. But then the fracking boom came and Odessa came back to life. The road was rebuilt. The motels reopened. The bars filled up again. And the old highway, the road that built the oil boom, was once again carrying the weight of the world. But Odessa is also a town of ghosts. There are old buildings that have been abandoned for decades, old houses that are falling apart, old people who remember the first boom and cry when they see the new one. They know that booms do not last. They know that the road will eventually move on, that the oil will run out, that the town will shrink again. They know that the road is a fickle lover, that it gives and takes without warning. And yet, they stay. They stay because the road is the only life they know. They stay because leaving would mean admitting that the road has beaten them. The road that built the oil boom is not just a physical thing. It is a cultural thing. It is a thing of songs and stories and myths. There are hundreds of songs about the road, about truck drivers and highways in the open sky. There are movies and books and poems. The road is a symbol of freedom, but it is also a symbol of captivity. You are free to go anywhere, but you are trapped in the cab of your truck. You are free to move, but you are bound to the road. That paradox is at the heart of the American experience, and it is at the heart of the oil boom. The road gave us mobility, but it also gave us dependence. The road gave us wealth, but it also gave us pollution and conflict and inequality. The road built the modern world, but the modern world is a world of problems that the road cannot solve. And yet, the road endures. It endures because we need it. We need it to move food and medicine and clothing and fuel. We need it to go to work and school and church. We need it to visit family and friends and strangers. We need it to escape and to return. The road is the infrastructure of human connection. It is the physical manifestation of our desire to be together and apart at the same time. There is a stretch of road in Utah called the Bonneville Salt Flats. It is a flat, white expanse that seems to go on forever. Race car drivers have set speed records there, driving faster than 600 miles per hour. The road is so smooth and so straight that it looks like a highway built for the future. But it is not a highway. It is a natural formation, a salt crust that has been hardened by the sun. And yet it serves the same purpose as the road. It is a place where people come to test themselves, to see how fast they can go, to push the limits of machine and human. It is a road of dreams. But the road that built the oil boom is not a road of dreams. It is a road of work. It is a road of sweat and grime and broken axles and flat tires. It is a road of men and women who do not have time to dream because they are too busy driving. And that is the realism of the road. It is not glamorous. It is not romantic. It is a job. It is a way to pay the bills. It is a way to survive. And yet, there is dignity in that. There is dignity in showing up every day, in doing the work, in keeping the world moving. The road is a stage for that dignity. It is a place where ordinary people become heroes, not by doing extraordinary things, but by doing ordinary things over and over without complaint, without recognition. The road is full of those heroes. They are the truck drivers, the roustabouts, the roughnecks, the pipeline workers, the gas station attendants, the diner waitresses, the motel clerks. They are the ones who make the oil boom possible. They are the ones who keep the road alive. I think about a woman named Margaret, who ran a diner on Highway 87 in South Texas for 40 years. She started in 1965 when she was 20 years old. Her diner was a small building with a counter and a few tables, and it served truck drivers and roughnecks and anyone else who needed a hot meal and a cup of coffee. She worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. She knew her customers by name. She remembered their orders. She listened to their stories. She watched them come and go. She watched them grow old. She watched some of them die, and she stayed. She stayed because the diner was her life, and the road was its blood. When the boom came, the diner was crowded and noisy and full of laughter. When the bus came, the diner was quiet and empty and full of dust. But she never closed. She never stopped serving coffee. She never stopped believing that the road would bring people back. Margaret retired in 2005 when she was 60 years old. She sold the diner to a young couple from Houston who promised to keep it the same. They kept the name, the menu, the signs, but it was never the same. The road had changed. The truck drivers had changed. The coffee was not as good. The people were not as friendly. Margaret passed away in 2015 and her funeral was held in a church near the highway. Dozens of truck drivers came, some of them from hundreds of miles away. They stood in the back of the church, wearing their work boots and their company hats, and they remembered the diner and the woman who fed them. The road had brought them together one last time. That is the power of the road. It connects us. It binds us together in a web of movement and memory and meaning. The road that built the oil boom is not just a historical artifact. It is a living thing, a thing of flesh and blood and steel and asphalt. It is a thing of stories. And as long as there are stories, the road will never die. But what about the future? What happens when the oil is gone, when the wells are capped, when the refineries are silent? What happens to the road then? I do not pretend to know the answer. But I think about the old roads of the Roman Empire, built 2,000 years ago, some of which are still in use. They were built for chariots and soldiers, but they now carry cars and trucks. They were built for a world that is gone, but they have adapted to a world that is here. The road that built the oil boom will adapt too. It will carry electric vehicles and hydrogen trucks and autonomous pods. It will carry the crops and the timber and the goods of a post-oil economy. It will carry people who have never heard the roar of a gusher or smelled the sulfur of a refinery. It will carry them to places that do not yet exist, to jobs that have not yet been invented, to futures that we cannot imagine. The road is patient. The road is flexible. The road endures. So when you next drive on an old highway or a new interstate or a gravel lane in the middle of nowhere, think about the road. Think about the oil that made it and the oil that it carried. Think about the men and women who built it, who drove it, who lived and died on it. Think about the road as a living thing, a creature of mud and gravel and tar and steel, a creature that has carried the weight of a century of oil, and that will carry the weight of whatever comes next. And remember that the road that built the oil boom is still being built, still being driven, still being lived, because the road is not just a road, it is the story of us, and that story is not finished yet. I think about a man named Carlos who drives a tanker truck for a major oil company out of Midland, Texas. He has been on the road for 22 years, and he has seen the boom and the bust and the boom again. His father drove a truck before him, and his grandfather worked the rigs. The road is in his blood, but recently, Carlos has been thinking about change. He sees the electric vehicles on the highways, the solar farms spreading across the desert, the wind turbines turning on the plains. He knows that oil will not last forever, that his children will not follow him into the cab of a diesel rig, and yet he does not worry. He says the road will find a way. He says the road has always found a way. Carlos tells me about a trip he took last year, delivering a load of crude to a refinery in Corpus Christi. It was a hot day, the asphalt shimmering with heat, the smell of salt and oil mixing in the air. He passed a convoy of Tesla trucks being tested on the highway, quiet and sleek, moving like ghosts. He pulled over at a rest stop and watched them go by, and he felt a strange mix of nostalgia and curiosity. He wondered what it would be like to drive one of those, to feel the electric hum instead of the diesel roar. He wondered if the road would feel different, if the connection between man and machine would change. But then he got back in his old truck, started the engine, and kept going. The road was still the road, no matter what was driving on it. I remember a conversation with an engineer named Alina, who works for a company that designs autonomous trucking systems. She told me that the road of the future will not be a place of solitude. It will be a network of sensors and algorithms, a place where trucks talk to each other and to the infrastructure. She said that the lonely driver, the romantic figure of the open highway, will become a relic, like the cowboys and the prospectors before them. But she also said that the road will still need human hands. Someone will have to load the cargo, repair the machines, monitor the systems. The road will always need people, even if the people are no longer behind the wheel. The road that built the oil boom is now being resurfaced for a different era. In West Texas, old highways are being widened to accommodate the huge trucks that haul water for hydraulic fracturing. In the Permian Basin, new roads are being cut through the scrubland to reach new wells that are drilled deeper and faster than ever before. And yet, even as the oil industry pushes forward, there are signs of decay. The small towns that once thrived on the oil trade are struggling to hold on. The diners and motels and gas stations are closing or being converted to other uses. The road is becoming a place of transition, a corridor between places that matter, rather than a destination itself. But the road has always been a place of transition. It is a line between here and there, between past and future, and the people who live on that line are the ones who understand it best. They are the ones who see the ghosts of the old road while driving on the new one. They are the ones who remember when the road was dirt and gravel, when the trucks were slower and the drivers were tougher. They are the ones who will carry the memory of the oil boom into whatever comes next. I think about a young woman named Rosa, who works at a truck stop on Interstate 10 near the Texas-New Mexico border. She is 23 years old, and she has been working there since she was 18. Her mother worked at the same truck stop, and her grandmother before that. The truck stop is a landmark, a place where drivers have been stopping for 50 years, but Rosa sees the changes. The diesel pumps are being joined by charging stations. The parking lot is full of rigs that are cleaner and quieter than the ones her grandmother knew. The drivers are different, too. They are younger, more diverse, more connected to their phones and tablets. They do not always have time to talk. They do not always have stories to tell, but Rosa still listens. She still pours coffee and serves burgers and asks about the road. She knows that the road is still a place of stories, even if the stories are changing. One driver told her about a stretch of highway in Oklahoma that is so straight and flat that you can see the curvature of the earth. Another told her about a mountain pass in Colorado where the road is carved into the cliff, and you have to drive with your heart in your throat. Another told her about a desert road in Nevada where the stars are so bright that they light up the asphalt. Rosa listens to these stories, and she thinks about the road as a living library, an archive of human experience that is written in asphalt and tire tracks. She told me that she wants to be a writer one day. She wants to write about the road and the people who travel it. She wants to capture the beauty and the loneliness and the grit. She wants to tell the stories that are not told, the stories of the people who keep the world moving while the rest of the world sleeps. She wants to give voice to the road, and that is the future of the road that built the oil boom. It is not just a physical infrastructure, it is a cultural infrastructure. It is a repository of memory and meaning. It will survive the oil, just as it survived the horse and buggy, just as it survived the railroad, just as it survived the telegraph and the telephone. The road adapts because we adapt. The road changes because we change. The road endures because we endure. So when you next drive on an old highway, or a new interstate, or a gravel lane in the middle of nowhere, think about the road. Think about the oil that made it and the oil that it carried. Think about the men and women who built it, who drove it, who lived and died on it. Think about the road as a living thing, a creature of mud and gravel and tar and steel, a creature that has carried the weight of a century of oil, and that will carry the weight of whatever comes next. And remember that the road that built the oil boom is still being built, still being driven, still being lived. Because the road is not just a road, it is the story of us. And that story is not finished yet. It never will be. The road is always under construction. And we are all travelers, all builders, all keepers of the story. The road that built the oil boom is now the road that will carry us beyond it. And that is a road worth driving, a road worth remembering, a road worth telling.